I lit the candle myself, single taper, stiff and silent, pressed into the middle of a dry lemon cake I'd baked from a box. The kitchen was dark except for the flicker. No balloons, no call. No footsteps coming down the hallway with a crooked smile and a Sarah for being late shrug. Just the hum of the fridge and the sound of a clock ticking away what used to matter. I waited until it was past 9. He always called by 8. Even last year, when they were on vacation in Florida, he'd remembered. Sent a short video of the kids holding a sign. Happy birthday, Nana. Their little voices had lifted something inside me. But this year, nothing. Not a text. Not a message. Not even a thumbs up on the photo I posted of the daffodils blooming in my yard. He knew daffodils were my favorite. At 10:15, I blew out the candle. I didn't make a wish. I just watched the smoke curl upward and disappear into the ceiling. I sat in the dark, still wearing the earrings he bought me years ago. Little gold hoops with a dent on the right one from where it once got caught on a sweater. I never told him. I kept wearing them because they made me feel remembered. Even now, the left one had started to itch. I didn't take it off. I don't know why I checked her page. Curiosity, maybe? Or the need to hurt myself a little more before. Going to bed, her stories were public, always had been. She liked the attention, the curated smiles, the filters that softened her jawline. The newest post was from a boutique in town. She was holding a cream-colored purse, beaming. The caption, read best birthday surprise ever. Thank you, baby. The timestamp matched the hour I lit my candle. I scrolled further. They'd gone to dinner, sat under string lights, and laughed over oysters. He wore the blazer I ironed for him last spring, the one he never came back to collect. My name wasn't mentioned, not even in a buried comment. Not even a nod. I had disappeared, quietly, completely, and nobody had noticed. Or maybe they had. Maybe that was the point. It wasn't the forgetting that broke me. It was the replacing. As if my day, the one I carried alone for 72 years, could be overwritten by the flash of a handbag and a plate of oysters. I didn't cry. I sat there, perfectly still, like a chair that hadn't been used in years. My tea had gone cold. The silence in the house had a weight to it, like it was pressing on my chest. I thought of calling someone, but who? Most of my old friends had moved away. Some had died. Some I hadn't spoken to since the last funeral. I'd learned not to reach out. Not because they wouldn't answer, but because they would. And I'd hear the kindness in their voice, and that would break me more than the silence. I opened the drawer beside my bed. Inside, under some loose batteries and a broken measuring tape, was the manila envelope I hadn't touched in years. My will. Printed neatly. Signed in ink that had faded just enough to remind me how long it had been since anyone had cared what it said. I pulled it out and held it in my lap. For a long time, I didn't move. Just stared at my own name in capital letters. The kind of name they'll etch into a headstone someday. Meredith Ann Whitlow. The kind of name that means nothing. Unless someone says it with love. My hand was steady as I opened the flap. The lamp buzzed slightly as I turned it on. I laid the paper flat on the desk. I read each line slowly, like I was reading someone else's story. There, in neat ink, was the section that named him my only son. The one I raised on my own after his father slipped out the back door one August morning and never came back. The one I worked night shifts for, skipped meals for, sewed Halloween costumes for when we couldn't afford store-bought ones. He used to hug me with his whole body, like he thought I might vanish if he let go. And now he had. I ran my finger under his name. Then, calmly, I opened a fresh folder on my computer, started typing a new draft. I didn't delete the old one. Yet, I just started over, line by line. It's clean and unshaken. It's strange how quiet power feels. It doesn't roar, it doesn't break things. It breathes. By midnight, the candle had melted to nothing. The cake sat untouched. And my new will was saved, unsigned, but ready. The cursor blinked on the screen like it was waiting for me too. Exhale. That night, I slept with the windows open. The wind moved the curtains gently, like a hand brushing past me. I dreamed of silence. Not the cold kind, but the kind that comes after a hard truth has finally been spoken, even if only inside your own head. He was born in the middle of a snowstorm, February 2nd, 1979. I remember the nurse saying it was a full moon. Kay and that baby's born under a full moon came out fast. She was right. He didn't wait, just arrived red-faced and furious, like he had things to do and no patience for delays. I named him Daniel. It was the only name that felt soft enough. We were alone from the start. His father left before the swelling. Even showed. Said he wasn't ready. Didn't want to live the kind of life where dinner came from coupons and the heat clicked off by November. I remember standing in the doorway as he walked down the steps, his jacket only halfway zipped. Not. Once looking back, I didn't cry. I just closed the door and put the kettle on. I've been doing that ever since. Quietly boiling the water and carrying on. Daniel never lacked love. I made sure of it. I read to him every night, even when I was too tired to keep my eyes open. I taped cardboard over the broken windows and told him it was pirate weather. We made up stories under the blankets, pretending the howling wind was just a sea monster passing by. I gave him everything I had, not just the big things like food and clothes, but the tiny things too. My time, my silence. Worked at a diner for 17 years. The hours were brutal, but the pay was just enough to keep us going. I wore the same black shoes until the soles cracked, then lined them with newspaper. Nobody noticed. Nobody needed to. My job wasn't to complain. My job was to make sure his life didn't feel as small as mine did. He was always bright, clever in a quiet way. He had this habit of touching my arm when he was trying to get my attention, even as a teenager. Most boys grunt or roll their eyes. Not Daniel. He was gentle, thoughtful. I remember one Christmas, he must have been 12. He gave me a gift wrapped in newspaper comics. Inside was a single glove. He'd lost the other one, but gave me the one he still had. Said it was warm enough to make up for the pair. I wore that glove until the wool unraveled. He met her at university, Rachel. That was her name. She had sharp lipstick and fast words. Always looked like she was posing for someone, even when no one was watching. I never disliked her, I just didn't know where to put her. She arrived like a gust of wind and rearranged everything. He called me less after she came into the picture. At first, I understood. Young love has its own orbit. But even after they married, I felt something shift. He started using phrases that weren't his, words like boundaries and space. He used to tell me everything, how he was feeling, what he dreamed of. Then one day, he started using silence instead. A new language I didn't speak. I never asked for much, just the occasional visit, a birthday call, a Sunday lunch. But slowly, those small things were bartered away. They became luxuries I had to earn. If I said the wrong thing, he'd go quiet. If I gave an opinion, she'd correct me. At first, I bit my tongue so often I could taste blood. Then I learned to nod. Then I stopped showing up altogether. The last real conversation we had was over tea. He told me they were struggling a bit financially, that her work was slow and the kids needed new school supplies. He looked embarrassed when he said it. I didn't ask for details. I just wrote a check and tucked it under his saucer when he wasn't looking. I told him I loved him as he left that day. He turned back, smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It hadn't. For years, I kept that smile like a photograph. Took it out of my mind when the house felt too quiet, when his daughter was born. My granddaughter, I knitted a blue blanket with her initials. It took me weeks. My hands cramped from the yarn, but I didn't mind. Imagined her tiny hands gripping it, her cheek pressed against it. When I gave it to Rachel, she smiled too wide and said, "Oh, we're doing neutrals now, but thank you." I never saw it again. Maybe it was donated. Maybe it sits in a drawer somewhere, forgotten. Like the glove Daniel gave me once. Except this time, it wasn't enough to warm anyone. People say love is patient. I used to believe that. But love, when it goes unanswered, starts to turn into something quieter. Not bitterness, not quite, just a kind of fading. Like an old letter. Left in the sun too long. I held on longer than I should have. Made excuses. Told myself he was busy. That life had gotten in the way. That he'd come back around when things settled. But life doesn't circle back just because you're waiting. Keeps moving. And if you're not careful, it moves right past you. That birthday, the last one, wasn't just about being forgotten. It was about realizing I was no longer part of the story. I wasn't even a footnote. I had become someone they thanked out of politeness, tolerated out of obligation. And even that had started to vanish. So I lit my own candle, sung to myself under my breath, cut the cake and wrapped the rest for the freezer. And I told myself, this is not how it ends. I didn't go looking for proof. I wasn't the kind to snoop. I was raised on the idea that privacy was sacred, that people show you who they are when they think no one's watching. But sometimes the truth just arrives. Not with a bang, but like a letter slipped under your door. It happened a few weeks after the birthday. I was at the pharmacy waiting for a prescription. The line was long. The woman in front of me had a stroller and was talking too loudly on her phone. She mentioned a sale at the outlet mall, something about designer handbags. That word lingered. I hadn't thought of it since that night. But suddenly, the image of her post came back. Her standing in front of a mirror, holding that cream-colored purse like it was the moon itself. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe I needed to hurt a little more before letting go. Maybe I was still hoping for a different angle, some detail I'd missed. But when I got home, I opened my laptop and typed her name into the search bar. She'd tagged the boutique. I clicked through their posts, scrolled until I saw the purse again. The caption read, "Spoiled this queen with our newest luxury piece. Full payment courtesy of Mr. Daniel Whitlow. Thanks for supporting small businesses." My hands went cold. The purse cost $985. It wasn't about the money. I've never been one to measure love in receipts. But I thought of that day he asked for help with the kids' school supplies. The check I wrote without hesitation. The groceries I stocked before their visits. The gift cards I'd slipped into birthday envelopes. Even when my own fridge was near empty, I thought about the gloves, the blanket, the earrings I wore, even when they itched. All of it. He didn't forget my birthday. He chose to spend it elsewhere. He didn't call because he didn't want to. And what stung even deeper was this quiet understanding that I was no longer the person he wanted to impress. He wasn't trying to make me proud anymore. He was trying to prove something to her, to their world, to the image they'd crafted, curated smiles and sleek handbags and captions that said things without ever naming me. I closed the laptop, slowly, sat still, no tears. Just a silence so full it felt like it might spill over the edges of the room. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The wind was soft outside, brushing against the house like it was asking to be let in. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat in the hallway. There's a small wooden chest there, tucked behind a cupboard. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were pieces of my life I'd forgotten how to hold. A crayon drawing he made when he was 5, me with giant purple hair and a smile that stretched too wide. A card he gave me after his first promotion, saying none of this would have happened without you. A photo of us in front of the old diner. He was barely tall enough to reach my waist. But he clung to me like I was the whole world. I ran my fingers over the edge of the photograph. It had curled from age. The corner was torn, like it had been folded too many times and finally gave in. That's how I felt, too. Folded, softened, used up. The betrayal wasn't one moment. It was all the small ones that led to it. The silences, the dismissals, the polite, measured love that came with strings attached. I started noticing things after that. Things I hadn't wanted to see before. Old texts I'd reread, thinking I'd misinterpreted the coldness. Messages left unanswered. Visits canceled at the last minute. Sunday, he'd told me they were too tired to drive out, that the baby had a fever. I'd understood. I'd even cooked a meal and sent it with a friend, just in case. That same day, they posted photos from a winery. They weren't tired. They just didn't want to see me. I'd spent so long thinking I had to earn my place that if I was quieter, more agreeable, less of a burden, they'd come back to me. But love doesn't work like that. Real love doesn't require shrinking. I began to wonder what else I'd missed. What else they'd quietly taken, knowing I wouldn't look too closely. So, I did look. I went through the files. It's the bank records. The shared accounts I had once offered access to. It's back when I thought generosity meant safety. And there it was. Small withdrawals here and there. Streaming subscription I never signed up for. Series of deliveries billed to my address, sent. Elsewhere, a joint utility bill, not mine, paid from my savings. Nothing massive. Nothing that would have raised alarms. Just slow siphoning. Quiet erosion. They didn't rob me. They just wore me down until I stopped noticing. That was the moment something shifted. Not anger. Not even grief. Just clarity. I saw it all for what it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not a phase. Not a misstep, a choice. Over and over again. They chose what was easy over what was true. And now I had to choose too. Not revenge. Not punishment, just freedom. And it would begin as most important things do. With a pen the next morning, I swept the porch. The air was cold enough to stiffen my fingers. There were dead leaves clinging to the corners left over from a windstorm. 2 days prior, swept slowly, deliberately, as if cleaning the edges of my life. Something about the rhythm helped. I didn't cry. I didn't pace or scream. I just let the realization settle into my bones like winter chill. The kind that doesn't startle you, it just stays. You'll learn to live beside it. Learn where to step, how to brace for the cold before it reaches your skin. There was a stillness in me I hadn't known before. Not numbness, not even sadness. Just a kind of unshakable calm, like standing on the shore and realizing the tide was no longer coming in. I sat with the manila folder that night, the one with my will, the deeds, the insurance papers. I laid them all out on the kitchen table, poured myself a cup of tea, and lit the small candle in the corner, the one I'd used for my birthday. I told myself this wasn't about erasing anyone. It was about remembering myself. I had spent so many years giving quietly, steadily, without keeping score. It wasn't about being owed something. It was about the assumption that love would echo back. That all I poured in would gently return, not as reward, but as recognition. But it hadn't, and now I no longer needed it to. I made a list. Not a dramatic one, just names. People who had shown up. My neighbor who brought soup when I was ill. A librarian who always held aside the books she thought I'd love. A niece I hadn't spoken to in years, but who still sent handwritten Christmas cards. I wrote them down. Their kindness hadn't been loud, but it had been steady. Real. Then I opened a blank sheet of paper and wrote, updated last will and testament draft. Unwitnessed. A name followed. And then, line by line, I began to rewrite my legacy. Not for who shared my blood, but for who remembered my name without being reminded. There's a strength in paperwork, in signatures, in the quiet, powerful authority of ink. I'd spent decades thinking love was in gestures and meals cooked, birthdays remembered, shoes polished by hand. But real protection, I now saw, came in paragraphs, clauses, the things you leave behind and the people you leave them to. It wasn't easy there. Were pauses, I'd write a sentence, then stare at it for a long time. Not because I doubted it, but because letting go, even when it's right, still carries weight. I thought of Daniel, his baby curls, his scraped knees, sleepy voice whispering stories into my neck during thunderstorms. I also thought of the silence that had taken his place. Of the cold, curated distance he now held like a shield. He hadn't shouted, he hadn't cursed, he had simply omitted me. And that, I realized, was harder to forgive. I stayed up until after midnight revising each detail, not out of vengeance, out of peace. A peace I had never granted myself before. I printed the new draft the next morning. The paper came, out warm from the printer like it still carried a heartbeat. I placed it gently into a clean folder, labeled it in blue ink. I knew it wasn't legal yet. I'd need a notary, witnesses. But something in me had already shifted. The moment the words were on the page, they became real. For the first time in a long time, I felt not light, exactly, but balanced. I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out an old notebook. One I hadn't used in years. The first few pages had grocery lists, old measurements, recipes, and half-faded pencil. I turned to a clean page and wrote what I still have. It felt like a small prayer, a soft declaration. I wrote my name, my breath, my quiet, my mornings, my garden, my strength, my story, my truth. Then I paused, then added myself. I closed the notebook gently, as if tucking in a child for sleep. The next few days passed in silence. I moved slowly, with care. Each drawer I opened, each letter I reread, felt like a closing chapter. I didn't rush, didn't explain. I didn't reach out. Something inside me had folded inward, not in grief, but in preparation. There's a strange dignity in knowing you won't be begging anymore. Not for attention, not for recognition, not for love. I used to think leaving meant slamming doors, making noise, letting the world know you were done. But real leaving, I've learned, is quiet. It happens in the unseen. The unspoken. It happens when you choose yourself in silence. And it happened for me. Over tea, over ink, over candlelight. I packed slowly, one drawer at a time. No rush, no panic. Just a quiet understanding that I was no longer staying. I didn't leave a note, didn't call anyone, no announcement, no goodbye. I told myself this wasn't an escape. It was a closing. Like turning off the lights after the show has ended, when the crowd has long since gone home and only the janitor remains. The truth was, they'd left long ago. I was just the last one to notice. The house didn't look any different, but it felt emptier. Not because things were missing, but because something in me had gone still. Like I was breathing from somewhere, deeper, somewhere quieter. I folded only what I needed. 3 shirts, 1 sweater, the black slacks I always wore to the bank, a cardigan that still smelled like lavender. I rolled them into my old suitcase, the one with the missing wheel. It leaned to the side when I pulled it, as if limping alongside me in a small pouch. I placed my documents, my birth certificate, the new draft of my will, the deed to the house, printed and signed, the financial papers I'd organized in a separate file marked clearly in blue ink for legal transfer only. I didn't need help. I'd already helped everyone else. This was the first time I carried only myself. The motel was 15 minutes away. It's just off the highway. I'd passed it 100 times on errands. A quiet place, half forgotten. It's a kind of motel where the clerk doesn't ask questions, just hands you the key and nods. Room 7. 1 window, a lamp with a yellow bulb. The bedspread had small faded flowers like something out of an old catalog. I ran my hand along the edge and sat down slowly. The silence in that room didn't feel lonely. It felt clean. I placed the folder on the desk, laid out everything I had prepared, 1 sheet at a time, like setting a table for someone who mattered. This time, the guest was me. That night, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of cars rushing past. Their lights flickered against the curtains, then vanished. I found it oddly comforting. Movement proof that the world didn't pause just because I had. Proof that I was still here. Choosing. The next morning, I walked to the notary's office, a gray building near the courthouse. No music, no pleasantries. Just the clerk, a woman in her 60s with eyes that looked like they'd seen everything. Twice she read the documents carefully. Didn't comment, she pointed where I needed to sign. I wrote my name slowly, clearly, when it was done. She tapped the corner of the page and said softly, "You're good now." I almost said thank you, but stopped myself. Instead, I said, "I know." It rained that afternoon. A soft rain, the kind that doesn't fall. It just lingers in the air, waiting to be felt. I sat by the motel window and watched droplets form tiny rivers across the glass. I thought about the house, my kitchen, the lemon cake I never finished, the bookshelf with my wedding photo tucked behind the novels. The sound the screen door made when the wind caught it wrong. Small things. But I didn't ache. I felt finished. Later, I called the bank. Spoke to a young man with a polite voice. I transferred what I needed, closed what I didn't, set passwords. Authorized one account under my name only. I thanked him when we hung up. Not because I had to, but because kindness, when it costs nothing, is still worth offering. I also called a lawyer, not mine, a new one, someone unconnected to anyone I knew. A woman who answered her own phone and didn't put me on hold. I told her what I'd done so far. She said I was careful, meticulous. That made me smile. No one had used that word for me in years. She told me the next steps. I wrote them all down in a spiral notebook, dated each line, folded the page and placed it in the folder. I didn't feel powerful. I felt rightful. Like something was being restored, not taken. I didn't remove my son from the will out of bitterness. I removed him because I understood now that he'd already removed me from his life. All I had done was match the ledger. I mailed the finalized papers to myself. A small symbolic act, proof that this chapter was no longer just a draft. And it was real. On the envelope, I wrote, "For Meredith and Whitlow." No longer waiting. I didn't return to the house. I called a woman I knew, June, who handled estate sales. She'd helped my friend Ruth when her husband passed. June had kind eyes and a firm way of speaking. I trusted that. I told her the address, said I'd left everything as it was, that I'd signed over permission for her to handle it. I asked her to keep what was useful, donate what wasn't, and to shred the rest. She asked if I wanted anything back. I said no. She said, "Not even the photos." I said, "Especially not the photos." They remembered someone I used to be, and I was someone else now. It started with a voicemail. I didn't answer. The motel phone blinked with a red light, slow and steady like a tired heartbeat. I waited 3 hours before pressing play. It was Daniel Lay. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you. Wanted to see if everything's okay. Rachel says you didn't comment on her birthday post. That's not a big deal, of course. Just call me when you get this." He sounded uncertain, like someone speaking in the dark, unsure who's still listening. I deleted the message without saving it. 3 days passed. Then another dot. Then came the text. Short and clipped. "No greeting. Dot, where are you?" I didn't respond. Next morning, another voicemail. This one longer. A touch of irritation tucked behind concern. "Mom, I've tried calling. Few people said they haven't seen you around. Is everything all right? Something's wrong. You need to tell me. We're worried. Rachel says you're not answering on purpose. Please don't make this a thing." He used the word "we" again. He always did when it suited him. We, as if her voice mattered more than mine in matters that had only ever belonged to the two of us. He didn't ask where I was staying. He didn't say he missed me. He didn't even say happy late birthday, just framed it all like I'd gone. Missing out of spite, I ignored it. I went for a walk that morning. The motel sat near a gas station and a field of dry weeds. I found peace in the ordinary, coffee in a paper cup. Strangers who didn't know my name, nobody asking questions, nobody needing an explanation by the end of the week. Rachel emailed me, subject line, Urgent message. We need to speak about the utilities. Some of the payments are bouncing. Also, Daniel mentioned you've been acting strange. Let us know if we need to get involved. Happy to step in if this is becoming too much for you. I read that line 3 times. Becoming too much for you. It was always wrapped in care. That condescension. That gentle way of placing blame under the cover of worry. As if the problem wasn't what they did, but how I was reacting to it. I didn't reply. Instead, I called the bank again. Told them to freeze the shared account. Finalize the split. Manager's voice was polite but surprised. Are you sure, ma'am? Yes, I said. I've never been surer of anything. That evening, the motel phone rang again. I let it ring. Let it echo through the quiet room like a bell tolling something that had already died. Then came a message from his sister, my niece. She lived 3 states over. Hadn't spoken in years, but she wrote, Daniel's been calling everyone. He says you've gone silent. He's worried. Should I be worried too? I wrote back, no need to worry. I'm not lost. Just finally quiet. She didn't write again. The next week, Rachel posted a photo on her page, not of a purse, not of a birthday dinner, but of their 2 children sitting on the porch. The caption read, Grandma, if you see this, we miss you. I stared at the photo for a long time. The younger one had my nose. I felt something twist, but I didn't move, didn't reach for the phone, didn't type a single word, because they weren't the ones who missed me. She was just using them as a prop, a plea, an image of innocence to veil her guilt. If they had missed me, they would have called, sent a letter, walked through my door before the silence became permanent. Instead, they posted public grief, private neglect. I turned off my phone for 2 full days. Let the world forget me. The way I'd been forgetting myself for years. Then, on the 3rd morning, a courier knocked at the motel room. He held an envelope. I signed without asking. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. From Daniel. Just 2 pages. Neat, careful script. Like he thought pretty handwriting could soften what came next. He wrote, I'm not sure what's going on. Rachel says you're angry. Told her you wouldn't just disappear unless you were hurt. But I still don't understand why you'd shut me out. He went on about confusion, about wanting to make things right, about how he'd been under pressure lately, and Rachel didn't mean to upset you. And you know how things are with work and the kids. There was no apology, just a soft reshaping of the story. As if forgetting me was a scheduling conflict. As if buying a $900 purse. Instead of calling me on my birthday was some oversight he could patch with a paragraph. He ended with, let me know when you're ready to talk. As if I was the one who needed time. I folded the letter slowly and placed it back in the envelope. Didn't tear it. Didn't burn it. Just set it on the nightstand. Then I went to the window, opened it wide, and let the breeze wash through. That night, made a list in my notebook. Title, What Silence Teaches. I wrote, it's not a punishment, it's a boundary. It's not the absence of love. It's the end of pretending. It's not what breaks the family. It's what reveals what was already broken. I didn't know where I was going, only that I wasn't going back. After 2 weeks at the motel, I found a room above a florist's shop in a small town about 30 miles away. The kind of place where people still nod to each other in the street. Where no one knew my last name and no one asked. The landlady was named May, widowed 10 years. Hair like silver wire and hands always stained with soil. She didn't ask me questions, just handed me the key and said, you'll like the morning light in this room? She was right. It came in soft through the lace curtains, warming the wooden floor in stripes. I started waking early just to sit in that light, with tea, with silence, with no one asking me to explain anything. There was a cafe down the street that served oatmeal with brown sugar and tiny pitchers of warm milk. The waitress called me ma'am the first time, but by the 3rd morning she said, same table, Meredith. It felt good to be remembered without being owned. The town moved slowly. People knew each other, but not in a way that pushed. Just a nod, a hand lifted off a steering wheel. There was a bench outside the post office where I'd sit some afternoons and pretend to be reading. Really, I was just watching the world pass. The parts that still felt kind. One afternoon, a boy about 11 sat beside me. He didn't say anything at first, just unwrapped a sandwich and stared straight ahead. Then he said, "You look like someone who used to be a teacher." I smiled and said, "No, just someone who's learned a few things the hard way." He nodded like he understood. We didn't talk after that. But every time he saw me afterward, he waved. That was enough. I started writing again. Not letters, not lists, just small things, descriptions, memories, fragments of thoughts I'd never said aloud. I wrote them in a lined notebook from the drugstore, sometimes in full sentences, sometimes in half-formed ones. Like, there is a difference between being alone and being abandoned. I am not the empty seat at their table. I am the whole table they forgot to set. The quiet is not punishment. It is the sound of myself returning. Some days I walked to the lake just outside of town. It wasn't much, just a widening of a river, really, but the water moved slowly and reflected the sky in a way that felt deliberate. I'd sit on the edge with my shoes off, toes in the cold sand, and breathe. There was no one to perform, for no one to keep composed for. I didn't have to smile unless I wanted to, and I found I did, sometimes, a real one. Small, unplanned. I met a woman at the laundromat. Her name was Lila, 63. Wore her grief like a shawl, not flashy, but you could feel it in how she folded towels. Her husband died last year. Her daughter had stopped calling. We didn't talk about it, not at first. We just sat side by side watching the machine spin. Eventually, we began to trade small kindnesses. She brought me biscuits. I brought her tea bags. She told me about her garden. I told her about a lemon cake recipe I never made again. She didn't ask about Daniel. I didn't ask about her daughter. But we knew there's a kind of love that isn't loud. It lives in shared silence, in side-by-side sitting, in someone remembering how you take your tea. I didn't need a family tree anymore. I needed a circle. However, small dots sometimes, I caught myself wondering, what if they reach out again? What if Daniel shows up? What would I say? But the questions came less often. The edge softened, I realized. I no longer wanted to be forgiven for walking away, because I hadn't done it in anger. I'd done it in self-respect, and there's no apology owed for that. One night, I lit a candle in my room. It's the same kind I used to use when waiting for birthday calls. I didn't make a wish. I just watched the flame flicker and felt the warmth of my own presence. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I wasn't missing from anything. I was here. And it was enough. It was early evening when the knock came. Soft, hesitant. 3 taps, then a pause. As if the person on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. I stood still for a long time. The air smelled like rain. The floor creaked beneath me. I'd been sitting at the window watching the clouds come in, notebook on my lap, pen uncapped. I hadn't written anything yet, just watched the page, waiting for a feeling to arrive. The knock came again. This time, I answered. Daniel stood there. Same face, but thinner, paler. His eyes had the look of someone who hadn't been sleeping. Well, he held his hands in front of him like he didn't know what to do with them. Behind him, the hallway stretched empty. High. Mom, I didn't say anything. Just stepped back enough that he could see I wasn't shutting the door. But I wasn't welcoming him in either. He didn't cross the threshold. I wasn't sure what I expected. Anger, maybe, or excuses. But he just stood there looking smaller than I remembered. Not in body, in presence. Like something in him had hollowed out. "I've been looking for you," he said. "I heard from May. She said you were safe. She wouldn't tell me more. Just that you didn't want to be found." I nodded. That was true. He shifted his weight, cleared his throat. "Rachel doesn't know I'm here." That made sense. I almost asked why he came. but I didn't want to open the door to a conversation I didn't need. So I waited. He pulled something from his coat pocket. A folded letter. He held it out like a white flag. I wrote this. I thought, maybe it'd be better than saying the wrong thing out loud. I didn't take it. He looked down, then placed it on the small table near the doorway, the one with the vase of dried lavender. I didn't come to argue, he said, or to make you come back. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for forgetting your birthday, for not seeing you, for letting things get to where they did. I stayed quiet. His words were better this time, slower, less defensive. But I'd learned that the shape of an apology wasn't what mattered. It was what followed. He looked past me, at the hallway inside Dott's. It nice here? I nodded once. Do you miss them? He asked. It was the first question he'd asked that wasn't about him. I thought for a moment, I miss who I thought they were. I said, and I miss who I used to be around them. Before I learned I was disposable. He looked like I'd struck him. Not hard. Just enough to make him realize he didn't have armor for this. He stepped back slightly, hands still loose at his sides. I don't expect anything, he said. I just wanted you to hear it from me. That I know I was wrong. That I see it now. I nodded. Again, seeing is a start. We stood there, the silence growing between us like a river. He didn't try to cross it. That, at least, I respected. I forgive you, I said. His head lifted slightly. But that doesn't mean I'll return to what was. I'm not asking you to, he whispered. Good. He nodded, looked down at the letter one last time. I hope you'll read it. But if you don't, that's okay too. He turned then, walked back down the narrow stairwell, each step echoing through the quiet. I closed the door gently, didn't lock it. Just stood behind it for a while, hand on the frame. The letter stayed on the table for hours. I didn't touch it. I made tea, lit a candle, wrote in my notebook. He came too late, but he came softly. That matters. But not enough to make me return to a room where I was no longer seen. Eventually, I placed the letter in the drawer with the others. Not unread. But unopened? There's a difference. Reading it would have meant was still waiting for something from him. And I wasn't. Forgiveness doesn't mean a door reopens. Sometimes it just means you stop carrying the weight of someone else's. Forgetting. The letter stayed in the drawer. Weeks passed. The ink inside likely settled, dried completely. The words were no longer urgent. Maybe they never were. They were just his way of saying he knew, at last, what I'd carried alone for years. But knowing doesn't undo the weight. And it doesn't erase the silence that filled its place. I stayed in the room above the flower shop longer than I thought I would. What started as a retreat became a life. Simple, unassuming. My name on the mailbox. My hands smelling faintly of rosemary from May's garden. My teacup always warm. I liked the smallness of it. There was no schedule, no expectations, just habits. Gentle ones. Morning light, afternoon walks. The sound of birds outside my window, unbothered by the comings and goings of the world below. I found peace in repetition. I found meaning in the absence of performance. No one needed me to smile. No one needed me to explain where I'd been. I'd been here, just here. Leela and I met once a week for coffee. She brought old photos sometimes, not to show them off, just to remember aloud. She had a way of telling stories with pauses in the right places. I think she understood what it meant to lose something slowly, not all at once, like a death, but over years in small disappearances. Phone calls that didn't come. Invitations that stopped. Affection measured out in teaspoons, then forgotten altogether. We didn't talk about our daughters or sons unless it came up naturally. And when it did, we didn't linger. One afternoon, I told her I'd been thinking about getting a small dog. Not for company, I said. It's just to have something that waits for me to come home. She smiled and said, that sounds like a kind of thing. I liked that phrase, a kind of thing. That evening, I lit a candle on the windowsill. Just one. No occasion. I didn't make a wish. I didn't think of Daniel or Rachel or the children I no longer knew. I just watched the flame. I thought about the old house, whether it had sold, whether the lemon cake pans were still tucked in the second drawer, the one that always stuck. I imagined someone else using the porch swing, sitting in the same place, where I'd once waited for a knock that never came. I hoped they were happy there. I didn't need the house back. I didn't need any of it back. Letting go wasn't a single act. It was a practice, some mornings. I still heard echoes of old grief in the quiet, the sound of Daniel's voice when he was 5, telling me he'd never leave me. The feeling of standing in my own kitchen on my birthday, a candle burning for no one. But the echoes faded faster now. I'd stopped chasing answers, stopped waiting for the past to rewrite itself in softer language. It had spoken already. I had heard it. And now I had the choice to listen to something else. One day I walked to the lake with my notebook. It was cooler than usual. The breeze sharp but not unkind. I sat where I always did, by the water's edge, on the flat rock that held just enough warmth to remember the sun. I took out the envelope from the drawer, the one Daniel left behind. It felt lighter now. Longer a wound. Just a folded piece of paper filled with what-ifs. I didn't open it. Instead, I tore it gently down the middle. Not with anger, just care. I watched the pieces float into the lake. They didn't sink right away. They danced for a moment, like they too were deciding what to become. Then they disappeared. The wind moved through the reeds behind me. A bird called. Overhead, somewhere, someone was laughing. And I realized not every ending has to be sharp. Some are soft, like a leaf falling, like breath, like the quiet that comes after forgiveness you've given only to yourself. I closed my notebook, wrote one final sentence on the last page. This time, I decide who gets to call me anything else. Then I stood and walked back, toward a life that, finally, belonged only to me. The end.